Okay, this tutorial is actually going to review the steps of getting into a database to run a search. This is often seen as a complicated step, and it is something with practice and time, and perhaps you viewing this video and following written instructions can become easier. So once again, you are logged in to the VPN from an offsite. And what we want to be checking here in the center is the home tab is checked. And what we want to be checking here is the subject guides in the middle box under databases. Typically in this profession in social work, you can click on social work. PsycInfo and SOS Index are the typical databases that may be searched. Unfortunately, I don't know if this will make sense, but social services abstracts doesn't run on EBSCO, and so we're just going to actually go with SOS Index and PsycInfo together. So what you want to do is click on PsycInfo. And this actually brings you to a new screen, and it's called the EBSCO host. And once in this screen, like I said before, we want to be checking more than one database. PsycInfo is a good database to find, and as you can see under here, under In, we have PsycInfo checked. But there are some other databases that can also be checked. Academic Search Premier is something that some of our faculty and students use. Another one is the SOS Index. So once you check these and click Submit, you will actually note that now when you go to run a search, you are going to be running a search through, and it'll be searching articles in the PsycInfo, Academic Search Premier, and the SOS Index. Okay, so at this point we're probably ready to run our search. One thing that we should be thinking about Okay, so here we are back at the EBSCO host research database. And as noted, we have the three databases that we're searching. One thing that's really important to think about is that you want to be putting, a lot of times when we do like a Google search, we just write it all on one line. That's not what we want to be doing for a database search. We want each concept to have its own line. So for example, if I'm looking at after school activities, put on one line, and teens on another line, and social development. So if I'm wanting to run a search on this, what I have to be thinking about is that I want each concept to be on its own line. The other thing I need to be thinking about is that the terms that I'm using to describe these might not be terms that are used in this database. So we kind of have to run the search and see what comes up. Under the select a field, I typically leave this blank unless it's a specific author that I'm looking for, or if it's to narrow my search, you can certainly look by just maybe the issue number or the title. But if I'm just running a search to kind of gather some material, this is how I leave it open. As mentioned before, you can check peer reviewed, meaning that it will only retrieve articles that are from peer reviewed status. There are some other ways, as you can see down here, to kind of limit your searches. Looks like what's happening is that PsycInfo has its limitations listed here. Academic Search Premier has its limitations here, and SOS Index has its limitations here. What you have to remember is that you are searching three databases. You don't have to. In this case, I'm just showing you how you can expand a search. And so what's happening is that each database kind of has its own ways of limiting. I did check peer reviewed so we can kind of see what comes up that way. So we ran this search and no results were found. What we have to be thinking about is that it's not that these are not out here. It's just probably, as I said before, the words that we've chosen maybe don't really match the way the database labels them. So what I'm going to do is actually start thinking about using some of our Boolean operators and putting parentheses around the after-school activities. And again, we talked about the using or to expand our search. And I'm going to actually maybe think about labeling another extracurricular activities or school programs and close the parentheses at the end of that statement. I'm also going to try to expand this by putting in, as I said, truncating teen and instead changing that to an asterisk and saying teen with an asterisk. Or perhaps adolescent is another way to describe what we're talking about here. But as I did before, I'm going to try to pull up adolescence and adolescent. And finally, this concept, social development. Putting a parenthesis around that, saying or, and interpersonal relationships, or perhaps peer relationships. Again, when you're running a search, you really need to be thinking about some synonyms that describe the concepts that you're trying to search for. And so one thing you might want to do is kind of write down some of the concepts you hope to search, and then really some synonyms that may go along with that, and kind of search it all. So let's see what might come up with that. Okay, we actually did come up with 11 articles. So this is a pretty narrow search that I came up with. As some of you may know, you probably run Google searches and you search domestic violence, you might get 5,000 articles or 5,000 links. If we type domestic violence in here, we might get the same. So kind of, the more you limit the search, you kind of have to decide limiting it and then maybe expanding it. Some people like to start off really large and then narrowing it. Some people like to start off really limited and then start to expand it. So whatever your preference may be with that. But we can scroll down here and we can look to see some of the articles that we might be interested in. What I talked about in that previous concept was this narrow results by subject, and that's over here on the left. As we can see, these might actually be good key terms to kind of describe what you were aiming for up here. They may not, but it is something to kind of be thinking about. Oftentimes when I run my search, I actually like to look to see what some of the narrow results kind of topics are. I also like to actually go into the article. If you actually click on one of these articles, it will actually tell you what's called these subject terms. And this basically are usually 2 to 10 terms that might describe what's discussed in this article. And again, these might not be, you might not be describing intergenerational relations. That might not be something that you're automatically thinking about. And so kind of starting to learn what some of the terminology is that might not be used necessarily, it might be used in the field, but it might just be used by these databases. So what you want to do is kind of look at some of these terms and see if they fit what you're looking for.
This tutorial will be continued in How to Run a Search Part 2 video clip.